Yo! Welcome back to One More Mana. My name is Derek and today we are getting right back into THEROS Beyond Death. For this week's deck tech, there's a lot of cards I was very excited about in this set, and there were a number of legendary creatures I was going back and forth about, but there's one card that I can't stop thinking about, I can't stop brewing with, and that card is Nyxbloom Ancient. Now I realize it's not a legendary creature, so how are we going to build a deck around it? Well, am I going to cheat and put a bunch of copies in? Am I going to cheat and put it in the command zone? We'll find out in a second. But before we get into that, please head over to TCG Player with the affiliate link down below to pick up any cards you might like in this video. TCG Player is amazing. You're going to be able to find all those extended arts, all those alternate arts, the foils, the constellation arts, all that crazy stuff with the 97 different types of booster packs they have out now. Simplify it. Go to TCG Player, pick out the exact printing you want, put it in your deck, and enjoy the beautiful monstrosities that are coming out of THEROS. Anything you do pick up with that affiliate link down below will help support the channel, help us get out more content and better content. We really appreciate the help. Now, getting back into Nyxbloom Ancient, this card has been haunting my every waking thought, my dreams, my nightmares. It has been everywhere. I can't stop thinking about it. And the fact they printed triple mana of any source onto a card, like, what were they thinking? And thank you. It's ridiculous. The only real comparison point for it is Mana Reflection. It's the only other card that I can think of that has any sort of wording like this. And Mana Reflection is insane. If that sits around on the table for a turn or two, the game should probably be over. So tripling, I can only imagine the effect this is going to have in a lot of decks. And this card just inspired me with so many brewing ideas and everything. I had to go ahead and dedicate a full-on commander deck to it. Now, obviously, unfortunately, it can't be the commander, so we need to find a general for it. Now, first, let's find a deck strategy. What do we want to do with all this mana? There's a ton of things. You can obviously, there's just ways to straight up win the game right away with that much mana, with stuff like Exsanguinate. I'm sure there's ways to storm off. You can make infinite mana with any of the monoliths, all types of stuff. That type of stuff really isn't my lane. That's not really the stuff I like to do. But one thing I do like to do that Nyxbloom Ancient would be great for is milling people. And I think Nyxbloom Ancient will allow for a very, very powerful and sort of realistic to win mill deck, which isn't normal in Commander. Now in Commander, because everyone has 100 cards and there's 3 other opponents at least you got to take care of most of the time, really mill tends to only be viable if you're doing some sort of infinite mana strategy. That doesn't really interest me, but this Nyxbloom is going to let us make so much mana, it might not matter and we can actually have a realistic chance at milling out the whole table. Now, obviously, Nyxbloom Ancient can't be our commander, so who is going to be at the head of this deck? And I'm super biased, but I don't think there's any better man for the job than Tasigur, the Golden Fang. I reference my own Tasigur deck quite a bit because I love it so much, but Tasigur is just too perfect for this deck. Tasigur is 5 and a black for a 4/5 legendary creature that has Delve, that basically lets you exile cards out of your graveyard to pay part of the mana cost. So we're going to be able to get Tasigur out early. And in addition to that, it's 6 CMC, which is so important that it's 6 CMC because we can use cards like Neoform or Birthing Pod. We'll get into some other options later to go ahead and go straight from Tasigur into Nyxbloom Ancient, cheating mana cost and getting this mana tripling monstrosity into play quick. Tasigur's second ability for milling and then getting stuff back from our graveyard won't come up a lot in this deck. It's not something we're focusing on, but in an emergency, it's basically extra card draw, and in a deck that makes so much mana, it's cool to have a mana sink on your commander as well. This deck, we want to be milling everybody and getting some crazy payoff for it to go ahead and take people out. Now, we're going to start with the creatures. Now, with the creatures, we have some mill all-stars in here. We got stuff like Dreamborn Muse. It's going to mill everyone on their upkeep for the number of cards in their hand. I love cards that either punish tons of card draw or tons of ramp. Kind of ironic based on the deck we're building, but still, I think those are some of the coolest things about Commander. Commander's gotten to the point where there's so many ramp decks and so many card draw based decks that it most of the time goes unpunished just because land destruction and making people discard is kind of frowned upon. But cards like this will allow you to punish people for it without taking away their resources. Unless you count their library as a resource, I guess. But it still is a great way to punish over card draw. It does affect us as well, but because we have Tasigur and so much graveyard recursion to make sure that Nyxbloom Ancient is always available, we really don't mind it too much. Another mill all-star is Phenax, God of Deception. Basically, Phenax just goes ahead, gets all your creatures with some big booties, taps those booties, and mills people for it. It is great. We have a way to get some pretty big creatures that I'm going to get into later, And yeah, this can double up for doing crazy damage and doing crazy mill. It can act as a staple in any mill deck, and I know it's the head of some pretty powerful mill decks itself. Now, another mill staple to me, and another one that is the head of a powerful deck, is Una, Queen of the Fae. I absolutely love Una. Now, the reason why Una is so powerful in this deck is because it combats one of the biggest threats to mill. And one of the biggest threats to mill is reshuffling effects. There's plenty of Eldrazi and stuff that when they hit the graveyard, they reshuffle everything. And that makes it a whole lot more difficult for us when we have to rely on some crazy instant speed exile effects so they don't just reshuffle and make us start from scratch. Una takes care of that. With Una, it exiles cards off the top, it doesn't mill them into the graveyard, and we can get fairies. When you get Una out and you start doing some of this, you might become threat number 1 because people don't want their library to disappear. So these fairies and this army of flyers that you're going to have to protect yourself is huge. It's hugely important for you to stay alive long enough to actually keep doing it. So Una is phenomenal. It gets around some of the best ways to combat our deck. It protects us. It does everything we want. It has beautiful art. Really nothing else we can ask for in Una. Another phenomenal card that serves more as payoff than mill itself is the Scarab God. The Scarab God will allow us to pick and choose creatures out of our opponent's graveyards, reanimate them for a cheap cost of 4 mana, and in the process potentially drain people and scry cards. Scarab God is broken in this deck, and one of the reasons why I love it is just very powerful graveyard hate. So many decks run graveyard recursion now, and when we're milling people and putting their big scary creatures into the graveyard, we don't want that. We don't want to help them. We don't want them to be able to reanimate it for less mana. We need to be able to exile those cards and make sure that we're the ones benefiting and not them. Looking at the artifacts, first one I'm going to mention, because I've already mentioned it before, is Birthing Pod. This is one of the all-stars of the deck. This is one of those tutors that's going to allow us to cheat Nyxbloom Ancient into play. This is taking full advantage of Tassiger's CMC and allows us on a pretty early turn to get Nyxbloom Ancient out and get our mana going crazy fast. Speaking of crazy mana, outside of Nyxbloom Ancient and in combination with Nyxbloom Ancient, there are some other huge mana producers that fit in with this artifact category. One is Doubling Cube, which in any big mana deck, come on, you want Doubling Cube, especially because Nyxbloom does triple the mana that comes out of Doubling Cube. I've already had this experience with Mana Reflection, and when you get Mana Reflection and Doubling Cube, you basically already win. I am so excited to hurt my brain trying to triple it instead. Mirage Mirror is the next one I have to talk about, and this card is so broken because it can become copies of any of the crazy mana producers. Now, obviously, what we want to be making a copy of is Nyxbloom Ancient, because then we get, I'm not going to do any math, we get way too much mana. We go from very little mana, then also Nyxbloom, and then another Nyxbloom, to as much mana as we can ever want. But in a pinch, Mirage Mirror can become copies of other things as well. It can become another Doubling Cube. It can become another Cabal Coffers, which, spoiler alert, is in the deck. So Mirage Mirror has the flexibility to, 1, protect itself, and 2, become another Nyxbloom Ancient. Like, come on, like, the whole point of the deck is to get an Nyxbloom Ancient. Having a way to copy it like this that has that versatility has to be in the deck. Next, we'll take a look at our Planeswalkers. If you've noticed from a lot of my decks, I don't tend to run many Planeswalkers, but the ones in here are phenomenal. Tamiyo, Collector of Tales, is just an awesome card. Like, 70% of the reason I want to put it in here is because that alternate art Japanese is just beautiful. It is beautiful. One of the best arts I think I've ever seen on a card. I love it. Also, it's super useful because we can, take stuff back out of our graveyard. So that's cool too. We can get stuff back from our graveyard to make sure that Nyxbloom Ancient doesn't stay dead for long. And the other one is going to be Kiora, Behemoth Beckoner. I love this card because we can untap a permanent on a Planeswalker. There's lots of creatures that let us do this, but the reason I love this so much is we don't have to worry about summoning sickness. We can play it, untap a Cabal Coffers, untap a Doubling Cube, untap whatever, and allow Nyxbloom Ancient to do its thing again. Now with the sorceries, there's a ton of amazing sorceries in this deck. For now, we're just going to focus on the fact that almost all of our ramp and our tutors are going to be in here. We have, specifically, we love ramp like Hour of Promise that lets us get Urborg and Cabal Coffers, so that way we can get that Nyxbloom Ancient engine going quicker. So we love ramp that lets us get any land, and tutors, any tutors you have. Run, if you have a demonic, great, but if you only have diabolic and all those, whatever, cheap tutors are fine. We have so much ramp in this deck, paying 2 mana or 4 mana for a tutor really isn't going to matter too much. But the tutors we really care about are the ones that are going to cheat our Nyxbloom Ancient into play. We've already mentioned Birthing Pod, but Neoform and Eldritch Evolution are really the two that are going to be the best for us. These are super easy to tutor up. For either 2 or 3 mana, we go from Tasigur to Nyxbloom Ancient. If we're delving and we're doing things correctly, not only are we tutoring, but we're also saving a good chunk of mana. These cards are insane in this deck. Now, if you've noticed, I have been skipping over some of my favorite win cons so far. So we are going to get to some of these if you do notice in the deck list. But one of the biggest payoffs, that's not necessarily a win con, but can be, is Mnemonic Betrayal. I love this card. It gives us access to all the cards in our opponent's graveyards. If we've been milling people the entire game, this lets us cast anything. And with all the mana that we're going to be able to produce, this can literally turn into some weird reversed version of Villainous Wealth as we cast our entire opponent's graveyards. This card is so much fun. Every time I've played it, I've had a good time with it. And because it is finite, it isn't Villainous Wealth. You're not casting everything. You have to be strategic and pick and choose, but it is tons of fun. With the enchantments, Search for Escanta is a beautiful card in the deck because it allows us to mill early to go ahead and delve Tasigur out, which is great, and some card selection, just a great card in the deck. Also, I love Unbound Flourishing. There's so many of our mill cards that have X, and the thing is, we might only have 4 or 5 cards that really synergize with Unbound Flourishing in the deck, but when it does go together, it goes so well that it is completely worth the slot. My personal Tasigur deck, I only really run, I think, 3 X spells, and Unbound Flourishing is still completely worth the slot. Looking at the instance, we have tons of counter spells, and this is not the type of deck where we're trying to tell people no. We're already playing some delinquent stuff. We're not trying to ruin other people's fun. These are just here to protect our Nyxbloom Ancient. We don't want people getting rid of Nyxbloom Ancient at all. We want to go ahead and make sure we always have access to it. So if someone tries to source Plowshare it or Exile or to get rid of it, we got to tell them no, and that's what these counter spells are for, to protect it, make sure that the whole point of our deck is to get the Nyxbloom Ancient out. We don't want it to disappear for good. And speaking of protecting it, I love Nauseous Revival. This is the type of card that Nyxbloom Ancient is going to die a lot. If it's in the graveyard and someone tries to exile your graveyard, you can all of a sudden, doesn't matter if you're tapped out, Nauseous Revival, get it back to the top of your library and protect it, making sure you still have access to it. Now looking at the lands, I already talked about Urborg and Cabal Coffers. All-stars of basically any type of ramp deck that is involving black. These cards are so broken, obviously. Now, the great thing about this deck is Nyxbloom Ancient is so broken in and of itself. If you don't want to drop $50 or whatever it is on a Cabal Coffers, you don't really need it. All the other stuff, it's going to work fine. Now, it's going to take it to the next level, but in reality, whether you're making 50 mana or you're making 250 mana, like, you're probably still going to win the game. But if you like comically large numbers, Cabal Coffers is what's going to get you there. And we also want to try to run, if you have it available, Vesuva and Thespian Stage, making copies of Cabal Coffers. Yeah, this sounds familiar. It's very similar to my Villainous Wealth, the Vile Smasher Villainous Wealth deck that I did a deck tech on a while back. This land base is very similar because no better way to ramp than multiple copies of Cabal Coffers, and no better way to take advantage of Nyxbloom Ancient being broken. Another awesome land I want to point out, also kind of expensive, so it's really not necessary for the deck, is Boseiju. Boseiju, who shelters all, is such a cool card because it doesn't allow whatever you use the mana on can't be countered. So if you get some explosive sorcery, which we're going to get into in a second, that is going to mill someone, you don't want them to be able to stop it and counter it. This can just guarantee that that instant or sorcery gets through, and in mill, yeah, you want to make sure if you have that big mill turn to get rid of the table or get rid of a person, you don't want it to be countered and have the swing back coming back at you. Outside of that, regular Sultai mana base, it's only 3 colors. We don't have to go crazy in on fetches and all that. Even just a fetch land or 2, if you can get the shocks, get those, and plenty of basics, and the deck is going to run just fine. Now that's going to do it for all the categories. Now how are we about to win the game in this deck? It is time for the game winning step. Obviously we're winning the game with Nyxbloom Ancient. That's the whole point of the deck. But specifically, what cards are going to take most advantage of our Nyxbloom Ancient? Now, I wanted to stay on theme, so everything is based around mill. Every one of these win cons has some sort of mill component, and we really want to be on theme with how we win the game. Now, the first way is not technically mill, but it involves mill, so I feel like I'm going off already, but it is Villainous Wealth. Villainous Wealth is such... When I saw Nyxbloom Ancient, my first thought was just, now I can Villainous Wealth for even more. I didn't want to base this deck around Villainous Wealth. It's not our primary win con by any means, but anytime you can get a deck making this much mana and it happens to be in Sultai, you want to throw Villainous Wealth in there. This is one of those cards people can get salty about, so if you notice that your playgroup hates when you cast it, maybe it's something that ends up getting cut, but it is so much fun, especially with Nyxbloom, to just cast someone's whole library. With Villainous Wealth, something I've actually started doing, and in this deck, I think it would be great for that. If I get a big enough Villainous Wealth that it doesn't directly win the game, so if I'm just casting 30 cards off of someone's library, I don't want the whole table to scoop because they're just annoyed by me. So what I like to do is exile all the cards and then maybe pick 1, 2, or 3 to cast, especially if you have a really fun game going. This is a great way to keep the game going but still get a huge game-changing effect. You might still win the game with the 3, 4, or 5 cards you cast, but you're not just going to drop everything on your battlefield, have no synergies, have this huge confusing board state, and literally just have people quit. It's a fun way to do it. So in a deck like this where your mana is going to be so big, that might be the best way to play it sometimes so that everyone, again, doesn't just scoop out of frustration. And obviously with Villainous, well, like I mentioned with Una, it exiles stuff. So this is a great way to get around those mill protection cards. And I mean, hey, if you get big enough, you don't even have to worry about casting anything. You just exile the whole library and that player is gone. The next way to win the game in this deck is a beautiful card called Mind Grind. It is another X spell, and each opponent mills until they hit X lands. This is crazy. You only need to get X to maybe 25, 30 tops, especially with how little land some people run. It is ridiculous how powerful this card is because it's just milling everyone. It's each opponent too, so you can take out the whole table. Now, I love to run this in conjunction with a card like Traumatize, because Traumatize, you spend the mana for that, you can mill half of someone's deck, and then you can Mind Grind. Basically, you only do that in situations where you don't have enough mana to Mind Grind the whole table, but it will allow you to essentially targeted remove someone from the game. It's just a great mill payoff, and the fact that it's each opponent is crazy powerful. Now, my favorite, absolute favorite way to win the game in this deck is actually the card that inspired me to go mill in the first place. I knew I wanted to build around Nyxbloom Ancient. I knew I had to base a deck around it, but I couldn't figure out what direction to go, and then all of a sudden, I discovered this little beautiful spirit bird called Mind Shrieker. I don't know how I had never heard of this card before. I love Mill. I love Innistrad. I guess I had always just skipped over it. I don't know how I missed it, but Mind Shrieker is one of the coolest cards I have ever seen in Magic and is genuinely one of my favorite cards. Mind Shrieker is 2 mana for a 1/1 flyer. You pay 2 colorless, and target opponent mills the top card of their library, and it gets +X/+X, where X is that card's CMC. This card is just, it's everything you could ever want in a mill deck. It allows you to mill people, which is great. You can just sink all your mana into this to just constantly mill someone over and over and over again. But the thing that I love so much is it gives you a combat way to win as well. You mill half of someone's library, all of a sudden, I think I had milled like 30 cards one time with Mind Shrieker, and it became like a 90-90. Those CMCs add up fast. This is Commander. People run a lot of big, dumb spells. This card is, people just don't see it coming. 2 people staring at it like, what in the world is this? I had never seen it played. I didn't even know it existed before I played it. And that's the best feeling in the world at a Commander table. If you do something to win and people are looking at it like, what in the world was that? Nothing makes you feel better as a Commander player. Mind Shrieker will get those responses. It is such a beautiful card, such an amazing card. And to me, the best mill payoff way to win the game in this deck, and the best way to take advantage of the monstrosity that is Nyxbloom Ancient. That's going to do it for this week's Deck Tech. I really hope you enjoyed the deck. I hope this is a little message too, that if you ever find a card that you love just because Commander is based on legendary creatures, you can base a deck around anything. You can literally make anything the focus of a deck. And Nyxbloom Ancient was just a card that I was so passionate about, I was so excited and terrified of, that I couldn't help myself. I could not stop brewing around the just insanity of this card. Let me know if there's any other cards like that. If you guys have decks built around non-legendaries, what cards you have them built around, and what type of deck strategies that they allow you to play outside of what you normally see. It's a really fun idea, and it does allow you to get some flexibility and just freedom in brewing in directions you wouldn't otherwise go. As always, a huge shout out to all the patrons. We love and appreciate y'all so much. Lots more shenanigans coming from THEROS Beyond Death. But until then, I will see y'all next time.